Hey everyone, hope you guys had a good weekend out there. This video is a couple of days late. I meant to get it done earlier, but other stuff got in the way. Basically, I want to address the current narrative surrounding Dragon Age Veilguard because of all the journalists, the things that they are saying, the sales numbers, the active players, and what that means going forward into the next few weeks. Before we jump straight in though, I wanted to thank everyone who's on board with me here. Just this past weekend I reached 4,000 subscribers, and yeah, I know that this is small, but damn, it's a lot for someone who procrastinated on making videos for years because of not expecting to have people interested in listening to me. So big thanks to all the subscribers, big thanks for all the likes, all the comments, all the feedback, the support, and even the criticism. If you're new to the channel or one of the people who have been watching but haven't subscribed yet, I hope you'll consider to do so. It really helps me out. Without further ado, let's jump into the video. Dragon Age Veilguard is an incredibly important game to a lot of people in the industry. We spent the entirety of 2024 with something akin to a war in the industry, with all sorts of vocal sides going at it. We've got very political people on the left and the right in a tug of war, pushing for games to reflect their values. We got people who are not only extremely reliant on the aspect of representation, but who also worship those who push for it to a point where it's being touted as an absolutely necessary element and feature to be put into our games. We've got people who could give a fuck about all of that and just want games to be good and not be used as a tool for propaganda. And honestly, it's pointless to name every subtype of faction because there's so many different kinds involved. There's trolls, there's haters, there's activists and journalists, and people who don't even play video games. They just want to invade the space and make sure that it's reflecting their personal political and ideological values and views. Basically just another cog in this massive wheel of culture war that they've got going on. Some people literally live and breathe politicization of everything, be it, entertainment media or the music industry or whatever. If they can grab onto it and make sure that it reflects their personal political views, they see it as a victory in their ideological warfare, where neutrality is basically seen as a loss. This kind of discourse has never been as strong as it has been this year, especially because of how so much information exploded out onto the open earlier this year in regards to diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives, programs and commitments from studios and publishers, overt injections of this stuff in video games, culminating in some of the worst writing and obvious virtue signaling that we have ever seen in stuff like Soy Squad, both at release but also in its seasonal updates. Also, the biggest failure in the history of gaming thus far with Concord, a game that cost $400 million to make and took 2 weeks to get shut down and completely removed from storefronts, with the studio following suit just last month. And of course Dustborn, which is just honestly so much that to put into words just doesn't do it justice. It's a game that would simply not exist if not for funding programs that are focused on pushing for political messaging into games rather than the quality of the games themselves. A truly baffling product that shows how far lost the director is mentally. Flintlock, another forgotten game that performed abysmally after being revealed that it worked with consulting companies. I played a bit of it on Game Pass a few months ago and it wasn't even that bad, just a genuinely amateur game where you can tell that the developers are obviously not that experienced yet and work on lower budgets. It's a game that would not have done very well even without its association with Sweet Baby Inc., but with the association it only made it worse, as some people who would have perhaps been fine with buying it and trying it decided not to do so out of principle because of all the terrible things that Sweet Baby Inc. stands for. Sweet Baby Inc. is a company that could exist to consult with smaller games just like this, new IPs breaking out onto the market, but they have sullied their reputation so much out of their own actions that now they and other consulting companies just like them are straight up rejected. As a small studio, you end up being far better off by saving your money, not hiring any of these consultants, and just getting a writer of your own. Unknown 9 Awakening also launches in total disaster. Unlike Flintlock, this game was actually far more influenced by Sweet Baby Inc. and it's obnoxiously noticeable via the attitude of the main character and some of the language therein. It was also in a complete shit state. bugs, terrible animations, piss poor AI. Like Flintlock, like I said, it's an amateur game, but next to Unknown 9 it actually looks like a fucking gem. At least it's only rough in its mechanics and you can still find some consistency and flow in the gameplay loop. You can tell some game designers worked hard within their means to try and make the gameplay fun. Unknown 9 on the other hand is just fucking terrible. It's like the game designers were far more interested in the messages they were trying to send rather than building a fun game. One of the things about Unknown 9 that I find so hilarious is that it proves just how false these consulting companies are. Usually, what is a consulting company for? Well, it's for consulting on things that you are not versed in. In Cyberpunk 2077, for example, CD Projekt Red didn't know anything about Haitian people or their language, so they hired consultants to guide them in that regard when building the faction of the Voodoo Boys. Know what I mean? They are there as something of an expert in the things that they are hiring themselves out for. Sweet Baby Inc. carries this image of diversity, inclusion and respectful representation, and yet they couldn't even bother with making sure that the Indian setting that they were creating was respectfully represented. In this game's setting of India, all the way back in 1912, they have a bunch of crowd dialogues that they ripped straight out of some fucking stock sound website or a video or whatever. You got people ordering coffee and food like if they were in a restaurant. Here's a clip.
Well, these NPCs talking in Bangladeshi Bengali language, which is very similar to my mother tongue, which is Indian Bengali language. I added subtitle. Now enjoy.
Fried rice, chili chicken.
It is no secret to me that a company like Sweet Baby Inc. doesn't actually exist to do any of the shit that they pretend and advertise themselves to do. So the fact that they don't even bother to do the one thing that a company like theirs exists to do doesn't surprise me that much, especially because usually trashy people like this are too lazy to even try to put up a facade, especially when the industry treats them like marginalized victims. They don't even feel like they need to put up any facade when they are already so hyper protected by the media and by directors, developers, studios in general. Plus, we already know what their actual goals are, as they've made it more than clear in posts and comments and shit on social media. It's not to consult, it's not for inclusion, it's for takeover, and it's for burning it all to the ground. So, like I said, it's not very surprising that they don't even find a way to incorporate what they are supposed to do in their work. But it is very entertaining to see that this industry keeps hiring them and pretending like all of us who see through all the bullshit are just terrible, awful people who need to be shut down. Just like how they just attacked Mr. Matty, who is actually like a super nice and super tame reviewer when it comes to talking about matters like these. Even he becomes a target to these people, someone that must be shut down just because in his Veilguard review he expressed that some of the things in the game feel like Sweet Baby Inc. quality. It just goes to show you that it doesn't really matter how nice you are, it doesn't matter how much you actually agree and support the things that they align themselves up with. One minimal slip up, one tiny little thing that you go against in the face of their ideology, and you are out. You are nothing. You are something that needs to be destroyed. This is worse than cult-like mentality. But anyway, I guess that brings me into Sweet Baby Inc., which was also exposed earlier this year to a wider audience, along with other narrative consulting companies like them who exist solely to inject political crap into video games, and have yet to demonstrate their actual talent as narrative consultants. This is the main reason why I even describe them as such in regards to the political crap, because usually if you exist to be a consultant for narrative, and the narratives of the games that you consult on are shit, regardless of the injections of political messaging, then that means that you are not doing your job. You're not worth a damn insofar as your job description goes. It's like if I hire myself out as a cook, but I actually can't cook at all. This, plus the fact that their existence is for other companies to increase their ESG scores thanks to the content that these narrative consultants put out, perfectly exposes them for what they are. They're not narrative consultants, they are DEI injection experts and propagandists. So, stuff like this has dominated the discourse online throughout 2024. There is this super acidic, super toxic spat between both sides of the aisle in regards to what makes a game woke, what games are woke, what's the success rate or the failure rate of a woke game, does a game that go woke truly go broke, what makes some games with woke elements still succeed, what makes others fail, etc. This is a topic for another video. For this video, the main takeaway is that Dragon Age Veilguard is a symbol. It's like a last line of defense for those people who have worshipped the invasion of all of this DEI shit and the defenders of those consultant companies to prop up as an example that yes, woke games are successful, woke games are what people want, there is a market for woke games, the industry is changing and Veilguard proves it, etc, 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 etc. Whereas for people like myself and those who agree with me that ideological bullshit and propaganda messaging should stay out of games, this is just yet another stained game with many more like it to come next year thanks to how prominent this shit has become over the past few years. Like, around the time COVID happened, these companies started diving into DEI. There are so many games in production right now that are still running with several contracts with consultants and shit over the past few years. It's nuts. I can only hope that the worst has already been seen with stuff like the aforementioned games and Veilguard, but who knows. Where it is still important that this game does not succeed because of the fact that it would send a message that this stuff is actually wanted, which is not really something that I'm worried about, to be honest. I think it's more than explicit that we don't care about this stuff and that the people who do care about it are incapable of making up enough people to make a game successful, especially in the AAA market. It still doesn't make Veilguard's failure this definitive victory. We still have a lot of shit to waddle through next year. So yeah, while Veilguard may not make it or break it for us, it is an incredibly important symbol for them. It is one that they will grab onto, prop up, lie and manipulate the narrative around to pose as more successful than it actually is, while also battering down the credibility, integrity, or hell, even the humanity of anyone who criticizes it. To certain people within the industry itself, Veilguard is deeply important for their agenda. Developers, publishers, higher-ups, consultants, and of course game journalists. It's even funny to think about how IGN's own review, they give it a 9, a near flawless glazing, and then on their social media posts they wrote something along the lines of, if no other Dragon Age game gets made, at least the series goes out with a bang. Which is so contradictory. After all, if a game is so good, if it is indeed a 9, a near-perfect game, a return to form for Bioware and a highlight for the Dragon Age franchise, then why the fuck would no other Dragon Age games get made? Hell, if the game was this good, we should actually be worried that too many Dragon Age games will start getting made, just to milk the franchise. Mobile games, a live service game, terrible Switch ports, a bunch of lazy post-launch DLC content, etc. This is the only danger you ever have to worry about when you hit a near-perfect game. Publisher oversight coming in and trying to milk it for all that it has, creating like a Fallout 76 type of train wreck on the back of a successful game. Instead, in the outcome, we have an announcement that no DLC will even be made for Veilguard, and the team is actually going straight into full production on the Mass Effect reboot. You will surely have noticed the language manipulation going on in the past few days. First, of course, starting with the reviews that went so incredibly far in praising this game that they pretty much broke the fourth wall. Do you know what I mean? Like, if real life was a movie, people would be walking out of the theater as soon as those reviews dropped because of how unbelievable they were. They praised it so hard that they broke suspension of disbelief. There is no way in hell that this game, even at its best, even if reviewed by a person that does not see or care for ideological injections, would ever be considered a return to form for Bioware and a Mass Effect 2 moment for the Dragon Age series. The truth is that the game is simply nowhere near the level of quality that previous Dragon Age games provided. I'm about to be as charitable as I can be right now. The writing is bad and unprofessional. The player choice ranges from non-existent to an illusion of choice. The way that you shape your character is gone too. Rook is Rook. There's nothing that you can do about it. You can't make him any more heroic than he already is. You can't make him any less heroic than he already is. You simply cannot change your protagonist at all, nor can you change your relationship with the characters around you. You can simply lead them into a romance path or not, and that's it, period. You cannot have disagreements or spats. Everything remains largely the same, regardless of which of the three options of dialogue you usually have available to choose. These were always things that people valued a lot in Bioware games. They made the player feel like their choices mattered and like the story was truly shaping itself around them, and it added to replayability as well. Without these core elements, regardless of the politics, regardless of the quote-unquote wokeness and your stance on it, whether you like it or not, whether you want it in games or not, whether you even personally identify with it or not, this still makes Veilguard the weakest and most estranged entry in the Dragon Age franchise. Just as I said in my video before launch, in a franchise where its core identity has always flopped around a little bit with each new entry, Veilguard completely ran out of the fucking field with it. It detached itself completely from this franchise. This is a Dragon Age game in name only. The things this game turned itself into aren't that good either. The combat is so basic it becomes tedious and tiresome. Some encounters feel good, but some draw themselves out way too much, and the way that you play remains largely the same from the first encounter to the last. I don't want to go too deeply into each aspect of this game in this video, I'll save it for another one, but suffice to say that each element that this game replaced its core elements with is bare bones and 100% not worth that replacement. They had a successful template to follow and they ditched it to make something new that just does not fit, and worse, that isn't even good. There are times where I am fine with changes to a franchise so long as those changes are good or at least competent enough to provide a fun game, but in Veilguard's case it just failed at so many different points. Again, more on this in my review or my analysis or fucking autopsy or whatever I'll call it. But, according to the game journalists, this is the pinnacle of the series, the peak of it, the best that the Dragon Age series has ever been. According to them, and even to known journalists like Jason Schreier, with a history of damn good reporting back in the last decade, this is not only a terrific Dragon Age game, it is a resounding success. But if we really look at the facts, it's more than clear that it is not. The quality of the game is objectively worse than anything that's come in the past, and in so many facets too. Like, it's not just the writing and the player choice, the characters, and the directing that are awful, especially in comparison to what Bioware used to do, but it's also the level design, the watered down repetitive combat, the terrible progression system, the character design, the art direction. Like, my god, what were they thinking with these characters? To rate this as a return to form, as an amazing game, as a Game of the Year contender is just... well, I have to say it, it's delusional. I'm trying to be as nice and chill on this video as possible because over the last few weeks with Veilguard videos I've gotten a little bit more heated than I usually like to. After all, it's just a game. But it's very difficult, in the best faith that I can possibly summon, to not call this a delusional take by these outlets. There are a lot of things that appeal differently to different people. That's why there's so many different reviewers on YouTube. Each have certain different tastes and different ways in which they review media. Some pay more attention to some aspects, while others pay more attention to different aspects. And it is normal to assume that it is the same thing in regards to the reviewers inside of these outlets, like IGN, Kotaku, etc. But there is no way that you can look at the history of Dragon Age, look at the core tenets of these RPGs, take Mass Effect into account as well, and then look at Veilguard, that completely changes even the very genre and the core of Dragon Age into something worse and poorly executed, and give it top marks, while also calling it a return to form for Bioware. This isn't even close, and it just goes full mask off on the fact that these people are handing out scores with an agenda in mind. This game is a symbol that needs to succeed, and it is based on nothing else but the political nonsense injected into it. And then people have the balls to say that this has nothing to do with politics and that it is all down to inclusion and representation. Bullshit. I have a video detailing exactly why this is not the case at all. They even contradict themselves when they like to use this line of all art is political, all games and stories contain politics. Bullshit as well. In-world politics are one thing. Real-life attributions through overt messaging or elements that break the immersion and storytelling just to send a message to the public were not the case at all. When people say that everything is political, all they mean to say is that there's nothing in this world that they will not corrupt with a political lens and try and take it over to politicize it and use for their own means and ends. And then that brings us to the numbers, like the sales numbers, the current players, etc. The facts also tell a different story. The peak players at launch was a mere 77,000. Then, on its first weekend, where most games peak, it had 89,000 players. These are incredibly weak numbers for a game of the size and scope of Dragon Age Veilguard. Dragon Age as a franchise is a massive name in the industry, and this is a brand new AAA entry in the series in 10 years. A supposedly highly anticipated game that people had been waiting for a long time, and yet it couldn't even reach 100,000 concurrent players. As a comparison, the daily peak of Baldur's Gate 3 on the exact same weekend, and I mean this past weekend, was 100,000 players, and at launch it was like 800,000 players. Other similar games managed to easily reach 200,000 players at least, and that's without considering the ones that reach far beyond that, like Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk, Black Myth Wukong, Hogwarts Legacy, and hell, even Starfield managed to reach beyond 300,000 players at the same time. Hell, even Skyrim, all the way back 13 years ago, when this industry was significantly smaller in terms of active players all over the world, managed to hit 287,000 players. Then you look at tweets like these from Jason Schreier doing a little joke, go woke, go top of the charts, and it's just so fucking cringy. Like, this is a grown-ass adult incapable with dealing with the reality, a journalist incapable of presenting facts, and even more embarrassingly, a guy who said that he doesn't even like the game himself and is just happy to own the supposed chuds. Like, this is the state that this dude has decayed into. From a guy who broke huge stories, dug deep into the industry to discover and expose difficult truths that companies had to contend with in order to better themselves, in order to make better games and treat their employees better and more fairly, to a dude that is now just happy to support a game replacing everything that made Dragon Age franchise successful with an inferior mindset that concerns itself more with half-assing the gameplay, the story, the writing, etc., so long as their political ideologies are fully represented instead. Basically pulled an act, man, where he would rather see games turn to shit so long as it would own the chuds, instead of seeing games get better so that we can actually get good content. At the very least, the least that he could have done is criticize the gameplay, criticize everything that's missing, criticize the change of direction, because to be fully transparent here, if at least those parts of the Veilguard were good, and truly harkening back to what Bioware was good at, maybe this game would have actually been successful and proved the point that we can have inclusion and representation of trans and non-binary people alongside a good game with good writing and world building that does not sacrifice immersion or character quality, and a good thrilling story, a good deep combat system, player freedom and agency to shape the story the way that they want to, so on so forth. But instead, the only thing that Veilguard proves is that, once again, political activism and quality game development do not go hand in hand. They are not compatible. They once again have shown that they don't match. They are so incredibly far from each other that they can't even take a franchise that has always had gay, lesbian, bisexual, and even trans characters and fucking make a good, successful game within that already accepting community. Veilguard ends up being an example of actually how bad this mentality is, how stupid of a decision it is to hand activists control of a franchise, even one that already had LGBT representation in it, because they are so out of touch that they're just going to push and push and push to the point of breakage. And besides that, it's also an example of how far gone Bioware is. Andromeda wasn't just a fluke after all, negatively influenced by a terrible management and crunch environment, split between two big projects, Andromeda and Anthem, because here we have a game that has been in development for years and years, with nothing else standing in the way of it, and it still ended up with dogshit writing, terrible presentation, and even more watered down RPG elements and mechanics mechanics than Andromeda had, a game that fundamentally misunderstands its own fanbase, its own identity as a franchise, and even BioWare's own identity as a studio. And even ignoring all of that, Jason Schreier's tweet was still bullshit. Like, this game was not topping any charts at all that are actually sorted numerically. Even within its own genre of RPGs, Baldur's Gate 3 still had it beat. And the thing is, even if it was topping the charts, look around. This was the driest October we've had in years. October is usually called Broketober for a reason, and that's because it's always packed with big releases. In 2023, we had Spider-Man 2, Alan Wake 2, Lords of the Fallen, Ghost Runner 2, and Assassin's Creed Mirage. Outside of Dragon Ball Sparking Zero and the remake for Silent Hill 2 around the beginning of October, we had nothing going on that could present itself as a competition for Veilguard. Hell, even Assassin's Creed Shadows, which, despite just being another Assassin's Creed game, would have actually presented competition since there's a total vacuum. But it was pushed for February anyway, so it's out of the question. So the true framing of the situation here is that Veilguard released in the perfect time frame. You could not have asked for a better one. It's October, right in the middle of autumn, a classic time for big releases, and yet it was releasing alone, with next to no competition when it comes to big AAA entries, especially in the same or similar genres. And despite this, it still didn't manage to get to 100,000 concurrent players. Is it good to have 89,000 concurrent players? Sure, of course. Is it, however, within the norms of a game of this scale, from a brand this recognizable, from a game this anticipated? No. Is it good when compared to the picture-perfect launch window that it was handed in a silver platter? Hell no. People had absolutely no excuse to choose anything else other than the newest, biggest AAA action RPG in the long-running and well-regarded franchise of Dragon Age, especially for its launch weekend. But they chose to play other shit instead, and this is because they were purely not interested. And it wasn't because of marketing either. The game was more than well marketed. The gameplay showcase followed with the October release date was a big boost. Several different trailers, gameplay breakdowns, super positive previews, followed by even more positive reviews through a process of excluding every previewer who presented criticism or concerns about the game, which is something that I will never fucking forget. They only handed copies to the people who were hyper positive and of course to the gaming news outlets who not only want to keep their access to the publishers but who have also spent the entire year insulting their audiences and pushing broken games like Star Wars Outlaws or total dogshit games like Dustborn down people's gullets with overly positive articles urging people to play them, and then, when they don't, calling them bigots, racists, sexists, etc. for not obeying to the regime-mandated video game consumption. Dragon Age Veilguard had everything it truly needed to top the charts, to break through at least 300,000 players on Steam alone, but it still failed to do so, and since most games peak in their first weekend, I don't see this game getting any higher numbers. Outside of utterly delusional reviews and delusional takes that this game is topping the charts, the game's media is also going to start, and in some cases has already started, to publish malicious articles attacking people who criticize the game as the usual shit that they usually call us. No surprise there. Or labeling them as malicious anti-woke review bombers, despite the game having actually been love-bombed on Steam to the point where it has a mostly positive rating as of now. And I just wanted to make this little video to kind of warn you guys that these malicious manipulative little tricks are going to get employed all across the board. Articles will be written about how well the game is doing, delusional tweets like those of Jason Schreier will be posted about how the woke game is actually taking off, and idiotic comparisons will be made by fans. I saw some people harping on about how it was the most played Dragon Age game to date, using images like this to show how it soared high above Dragon Age Inquisition, which is fucking nuts to me. I don't know if they're serious and just stupid or if they're being deliberately dishonest. Look at the date. July of 2020 is the furthest back that the data goes because Dragon Age Inquisition was released on EA Origin. Remember EA Origin, that dogshit platform that EA made to launch their games in, thinking it would bring them as many players as Steam? I mean, they weren't the only ones, of course. Ubisoft also did it, but anyway, that doesn't really matter. The game only launched on Steam in 2020, 6 years after its release. No wonder the all-time peak is only 5,000 people. If the real peak of Dragon Age Inquisition was 5,000 players, this series would have died in 2014.
Some people are really fucking stupid.
There's gonna be a lot of copium online, as well as a lot of malicious, manipulative articles and posts attacking regular people who simply dislike the game, whether it be because of the injections or because of just a poor state of everything that once made Bioware games great. Also, articles and posts painting unrealistic or outright delusional pictures of the success that this game had, or even the quality of it. I aim to break down some of them very soon when I get around to making my own review, and also taking apart the lies in the glowing reviews that the official outlets gave it. I am purposefully taking my time with the game, despite how much I wish that I could be doing something else with my free time instead, just so that I have full context and knowledge of what the fuck I'm talking about when I tackle those bullshit reviews. Until that day though, treat yourselves to some nice games instead. October has been pretty empty, but there's a lot of cool shit some of you might like but haven't checked out yet, or even games to replay. Give your libraries a nice long stroll, see if something calls out to you, and if not, have some suggestions during the outro of this video. Thanks very much for watching, like the video if you liked it, and if you've got any thoughts or feedback, let me know in the comments. Have a nice day, and I will see you on the next one.